is Joel Cooper, and I'm a volunteer here at Bethabara. I do a old-fashioned woodworking exhibit back like they did when the Moravians were here. And the type of woodworking that I do is that I take pieces of wood and I shape them with specialized tools. And when I'm done with the process of shaping each individual board, they're used in the process of putting them together to make a bucket or a barrel. So what a Cooper makes is a whole lot of different types of containers, because back in the day there weren't plastic containers and milk bottles, there wasn't any cardboard boxes. So if you had to store something or carry something in your house or in a store, everybody had to use wooden containers. So Saturday morning, your mother would get out the wash tub and fill it up with soapy water, and all the kids had to take a bath in one tub. And this is, of course, before indoor plumbing and all that. But these are all constructed out of individual pieces of wood that go all the way around, that are held in place with these hoops, and they're quite strong, really strong. You know, they would pack these up and put them on ships. And the barrel is a universal invention that's about 2,000 years old, but it uses wood and bends them in place. And then this shape, if you filled that up with nails or if you filled that up with flour, it'd weigh a lot. And I'm not going to lift it, but I could sure roll it, or I could roll it up and put it into a ship. So even these shapes, you know, I got a bucket and I want a handle that's real easy to pick up. So they've invented a piggin. That's what that is. Small things, even like in a kitchen, you'd find wooden containers. Mugs that you drank out of. We were all made out of wood. So it's a long time ago, and these are pretty obsolete now. But let me show you how they're made. What I was doing before is showing you how I shaped these boards. But imagine a day before there was Lowe's and Home Depot where you could get boards, and even before there was a sawmill invented. The Cooper had to make boards out of logs, and the process, I'll show you right here, is splitting a log like any old firewood with a special tool called a froe. All right, and the Cooper would be able to cut these logs. Oh, by the way, this high-tech tool here is a wooden mallet, and believe it or not, I make them myself. Good tool. But then bash this through, and this is cedar, so it splits pretty good. But what I want is exactly a 1-inch board out of this. So I'm able to put the tool on there at the 1-inch mark. And I got a 1-inch board. Riving with a froe and a mallet is how you get a board. So then the Cooper would take this over to the shop, and this device that I'm sitting on is a modern version of this. It's called a shaving mule. And what it is that with your foot, you're able to accentuate a head that holds the wood really tight. This is like a vise, so the Cooper has both hands available to use the tools for shaping the boards. So the old-fashioned one is like that. Modern one is adjustable, and I could do the edges really easily, straight up. Hold on, real easily, straight up. For that, I'm going to use the straight draw shave, and I'm able to take that right down and make the edge real smooth. See, already that's pretty straight already, and it's just a hand tool. So I'll do the edges like that, and before you can say Jiminy Cricket, and I can adjust this again. I use a different tool called a scorp. It's got a curved blade on it, And the curved blade is because each piece that goes in there is concave on the inside as to hold the liquid or the material that's inside of the barrel or the bucket that you make. So this is an all-day job because each one of these containers, you gotta make 20 pieces of wood, 20 shaves, 20 of these that are called staves, the individual pieces. So my job is to make 200 or 300 of these today, and then 200 or 300 more of these tomorrow, in order to keep up with the demand. Because, for example, 5 wash tubs, I got to make over 200 of these. So I have a huge pile of boards and a huge pile of shavings, and I've done a pretty good day's work. Let me show you how these are put together. I'm just going to show you how these are assembled. It's one thing to make 100 or 200 or 300 staves, but the staves are each individually shaped, and then they are assembled in the assembly department over here. But let me show you one thing. Before, they've been making these containers out of wood for about 2,000 years, back to the Roman days, Roman history. And they had an invention based on what they made containers out of before they made them out of individual pieces of wooden staves. This is called a hornbeam in this part of the country, and it's a hollow log that has been carefully chiseled out all the way around, and then you nail a bottom in it, and you call that a container. And that's all they had, and that is anything but watertight. You can never ever make that watertight. It's good for grain, it's good for dry materials, it's good for carrying stuff. But when some smart individual came up with the idea of using pieces of wood assembled to replace that hand chiseling activity, that job looked a whole lot easier than this job and a whole lot faster. You have to understand that even in ancient times, that society, that civilization had a huge need for containers, just like we do today, just like we did with the Moravians. So that the early manufacturers of barrels had a huge demand to keep up with. But let me show you. What I've done is taken from here, and that's the finished product. It's a perfectly shaped stave, and you can see that it would go inside all the way around and held in place with hoops. So the hoops, in the good old days, the cooper would be making the hoops out of wood and bending them in place and being able to put them on any size container, so small, medium, or large. But then, as we started using more and more iron and having it available, I was able to go down the street to my friendly blacksmith and say, hey, make me up some hoops. So in later years, and about the time of the Moravians, and if you look around, you'll see rain barrels that are made all with the metal hoops. So it's about this time. But these hoops are designed to hold all the individual pieces of wood together. Let me show you how that's done. There are many, many types of containers, but they fall basically into 2 categories. And that same for the job, that there are coopers that make really tight, watertight containers, like for wine and for bourbon and for export shipments. And the other type is the slack cooper, and the staves that the slack cooper make are all straight. So you can see how these would fit together, and there's no bending needed with these types of containers. But with this, the cooper has to assemble it with boards that are green and wet and hot, steam bend them so that they're formed into the curve between the 2 hoops. So let me show you how that's done. The hoops fit over, as you can see, on all of these. And what they do is, because the shape of the stave is narrow and then wider, that when the hoops come down on top of this, when it's all put together, it's going from a small diameter to a larger diameter, and that pressure actually holds this all together without glue, without duct tape. This arrangement of just plain wood with these surfaces, tapers and miters, all fit together so perfectly. But let me show you how this hoop works. That you can see that this is loose. It took me a little while, but before you came, I put all these together in place. And believe it or not, there's a specialized tool, a hooped hammer and a driver. And the hammer and the driver make this tighten up all the way around. Let me show you how this is done. That all the way around, the Cooper bangs the hoop down onto these things, tighter and tighter. And you can see that the bottom is wide open. And what's going to happen is, once this is in place, we'll tip it upside down and then have to fit the hoops on top of it. But watch this. For just that amount, it's already strong enough to lift up and hold it together. You can see that the next step is going to be putting a hoop over the top and then pulling them in so that these all fit together. And ultimately, the job is done. It looks like that. What's amazing, I've been doing this for a while, and what's amazing to me is just how strong these are with the pressure of the hoops. In fact, a lot of times these will loosen up a little bit, and my job as the Cooper would be to come by and I could actually hammer those back in place so that a leaking bucket wouldn't leak anymore. So you might ask me, how is it possible to put two pieces of wood together, even with the pressure of the hoops, and it's still watertight? And the answer is this tool over here. Any of you that are woodworkers and are familiar with a plane, you know that the purpose of a plane is to make a straight edge with a cutting tool over the board. And in regular carpentry, you hold the board in place in a vise or whatever and use the plane, modern plane, on it. In the good old days, the Cooper had a different idea, especially if you have to make 500 or 600 staves a day. The plane is actually in this huge hunk of wood with the cutting blade there, and the Cooper runs the board across the plane rather than running the plane across the board. When that happens, the cutting edge is right there, and it's really sharp. I'm able to put the board on the plane, and it has to be right at that. Remember we talked about a taper, that each of these fit together. So the taper and then the miter, that the edge is slightly into it. So the Cooper expert puts this at exactly a 9 degrees angle and runs it across the blade that's in here. So I'm running this, hold on. Look at this. Takes off that much wood, perfectly even, the whole length of the board, and it's a perfectly straight angle. I mean, a perfectly straight miter line. And when you fit it up to the one next to it, it becomes absolutely airtight. Can't even see light through there. And if you can't see light through there, you sure can't have water running through it. All right, let me show you the exhibit here at Bethabara. While this is an authentic barn, it's been converted over to an exhibit area for all the trades that were in place back in the day when Coopers were so busy making wooden containers. These buildings, let me just show you one thing. These buildings are made out of timbers that, again, before sawmills, they squared these timbers off with a thing called a broad axe. And it was somebody's job to go out in a field where all the logs are and square off each one of them. And if you look through the building, there's 100 of them in here, and somebody went out, and you could see that the marks on each one of these coincide with the face of the broad axe. So that was somebody's full-time job. Personally, sitting down making staves is a lot better job, I think. The Cooper had it good. But in here, and if you come to Bethabara, make sure you stop by what's called the Calf Barn. In here, there are exhibits that are similar, well, including a Cooper, but a wheelwright, a job making wheels for wagons, joiner, a cabinet maker. Over in the corner, there's even an old coffin. When you're here in the woodworking area, you'll see the work of a wheelwright on this old covered wagon, horse-drawn, of course, but for them to go over unimproved roadways, these wheels and the structure had to be enormously strong. And of course, a practical cover made out of canvas that kept it watertight. But these are the ones, when you hear about the settlers migrating west, these are the types of wagons that they were in. And they're always based on the woodworking skill of the wheelwright. In back of me and all across this wall are the types of tools that were used in the agricultural field for farmers. And you can see that similar to the woodworking trades, there are very, very specific tools for each of the jobs that needed to be done on a farm. Amazing inventory.